Welcome to Side Alpha Leadership, a podcast where leaders can share their experiences and discuss what leadership means to them. I'm your host, David Polikoff. Hello and welcome to part 2 of my interview with Dave Braun on Side Alpha Leadership. Again, I'm your host, David Polikoff. In part 1, we talked about, Dave talked about, him growing up in the Baltimore area, and he was with his I guess pre-high school sweetheart, and she was pregnant with their first child. He recognized that, I got to do something with my life. I got to make it out of Baltimore. He joined the Marines, went through boot camp, got all he ever wanted, his MOS, to be infantry, and then he ultimately went through Marine Scout Sniper School, which is a pretty tough school to go through. He passed. He went from being a pig to a hog, and Dave can recap that. And he was deployed over in Somalia. They went to Kosovo, or I think it was Somalia. Then they don't know we went to Kosovo. And we left off with him being deployed to Iraq. It was a quick turnaround without a break. I know they were on for 6 months, and they were supposed to get a break, but they didn't. So they ended up getting back to Iraq. So without further going on, Dave, welcome back to the show. And let's pick up where we left off with being in Iraq.
Yeah, thank you. Glad my story can span 2 episodes here. Hopefully we can keep everybody interested. Just a couple quick clarifications. Never deployed to Somalia, Kosovo. Actually, it was a MU deployment, so it was a whole bunch of places we went to. Unfortunately, Somalia wasn't one of them, but Kosovo, Africa, UAE, Djibouti, it was quite a few. And like you said,
it was in Africa. It just wasn't Somalia. How about that?
Correct. It was the Horn of Africa is what they called it.
Right.
So it close enough. So in the Marine Corps, that's typically how at the time, and I'll say pre-Iraq, that's how deployments were done. You would go out 6 months at a time. I like to describe it, and I might have said this in part 1, but it's almost like a 911 service for the world. We kind of sit in these strategic spots in the ocean. We go out where needed. So we had already been out to sea for actually over 6 months. We had been extended once, which was highly unusual for Marine Corps deployments. But in our minds, we were not going to be a part. I believe a warning order had already been given. I don't remember the specific timeline, but Iraq was certainly starting to pop off, and Bush had made his statement, and obviously Saddam had, did not do what President Bush asked him to do. So troops were starting to stage into Kuwait. In our mind, because we had been out to sea for so long, we were essentially told we were combat ineffective, just that we didn't have a lot of equipment, a lot of our helicopters, a lot of our AAV, stuff like that. When we deploy for 6 months, we don't expect to be out there for twice as long. So eventually that battalion landing team becomes ineffective. But so we get word that we're going to be a part, that we're going to Kuwait. We don't really get told what we're going to do or who we're going to be with, just that we're essentially this extra battalion, so to speak, that's going to get tasked once we get to Kuwait. We get to Kuwait, and that's kind of where I was saying last time that everything I had known and expected out of Marine Corps in regards to training and workups and all of that had pretty much gone out the window. We had, I can kind of summarize it with a briefing our squad leader gave us, where he called us into a tent and said that they were briefed from higher that they don't know who we're going to be a part of, but we're going to attach with someone, and we're all kind of making our way to Baghdad, and that they had given the Iraqi people time to evacuate, and that it's essentially once we cross that border, it's shoot to kill. We were told that we're going to be facing an enemy, and this enemy it's real, and they're gonna be doing their best to stop us, to kill us. So do what we can. We've got, I think it was 2 or 3 nights, do what we can, make our phone calls. We had a satellite phone in the area, and write our letters. And once we cross that border, we don't know when we're coming back. We don't know anything. And obviously a lot of that's operational security and such. But being out to sea and personally expecting to go home and having children at home, and wondering if I was going to be a part of this war. And I kind of had conflicting thoughts about it. I knew I wanted to be a part of it, but at the same time, it's like, you know, it's that fear. It's that fear of the unknown, of what is this really going to be like? And the only thing we really had to go off of was what movies showed us, which, as you know, Michael Bay and I mean, they make combat look awfully exciting. And so we eventually got attached to what they called Task Force Tarwa, which was this massive column. It was multiple battalions, basically a rolling war effort, very similar to what Russia is doing right now in Ukraine. And we were just going to be heading towards Baghdad, and the conflicts we got in along the way, we were going to deal with them, and we were going to get tasked as such. So there's one really specific story that I want to touch on in this very first deployment. I think a lot of what had happened in Iraq during the main effort, the war, a lot of people saw it on TV. This was really the first war where the media was essentially a part of that effort. We had multiple reporters with our squads, with our teams, with our platoons. Very much from the jump, it was, hey, give these journalists access until America says we don't want to see this anymore. So one of our first major conflicts we got into during this initial push was in a place called Nazarene. It was a unit ahead of us, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, that had seen the bulk of fighting in Nazarene. We were behind them, making our way up to reinforce them. And at the time, there was a bridge, and I know the Marines were trying to get across the bridge, and they were being held back by I want to add that up until this point, a lot of the enemies, so to speak, that we had faced, it was mostly just people trying to flee Iraq. We didn't really see any remnants of the Iraqi Republican Guard or the Ba'athist Party or any of that. So it was almost like we were starting to think, well, maybe they all ran away. And then Nazarene happens, and it's like, okay, well, they didn't run. We just hadn't gotten to them yet. So my first, I guess you could say, introduction to, hey, war, this is what it's going to be like from here on out, was a pretty notable friendly fire incident. There was a squad of Marines, I believe it was 18 total, don't quote me on the number, that were on the ground, and they were calling in for air support. And I don't want to get into the absolute specifics of this. If anyone wants to learn about this incident, they can certainly Google friendly fire Nazarene, and I'm sure it'll come up. But you had an individual who was in charge, who was expected to be responsible with his decision, who had made a decision and called for fire, and at some point was told by more experienced individuals, sir, I don't think this is a good idea. We're a little too close. Chose to do it anyway, and this Warthog opened fire on these Marines. Warthog, for those that don't know, it's an A-10. It's a very, very, very deadly plane. It's the one everybody says goes BERT, or however they say it. But it had opened fire on these Marines, and one of the Marines was someone that I went through boot camp with and School of Infantry with and had a pretty close relationship with. And 18 Marines gone like that from essentially from a decision that shouldn't have been made in the first place. And you would have thought that there would have been controls in place and procedures in place to stop that individual from making that decision. But very quickly it was, look, it's life or death out here, and wrong decisions, we don't get to reset. We don't get to get back in the battlefield and start over again. If we make a wrong call out here, we could very well be sending that person to our left or to our right home in a body bag. and not to get too much into the politics of war, because that's a whole nother topic, and I could spend probably another 6 or 7 episodes talking about that.
Right.
But there was a significant change in my mindset at that moment. I felt like, well, I'm really, really, really fortunate that the Marines that I'm with and the squad leader that I'm with and the team leader that I'm with, that's not them. I almost felt like I don't want to say, it almost felt like I was getting off easy, so to speak, because I had such a rock star for a squad leader that every time I got scared, I had it in the back of my mind that, you know what, if something's going to happen to me, the individuals that are telling me where to go and what to do, they're some of the best in the business. So if something's going to happen to me, it was going to happen anyway, right? It's not going to happen because someone made a bad decision, or if it does happen, it's going to happen because someone well above that individual made a bad decision. And my squad leader, he stood up for us. He knew when to talk. He knew when to shut officers down. He knew when to shut plans down. He knew when to just go with the flow. And hearing that story, it's like, it was frightening, to be honest with you. So we eventually got up to Nazaré. We reinforced 1-2. At one point, some of the locals had stolen a body of one of the fallen Marines, and there's a pretty famous photo out there of Fox Company from 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines. We had informed the people inside of this town, who were mostly hostile, that, listen, we're just pushing our way up to Baghdad. If you don't give us that body back, we're going to level this town. We're taking this Marine home. And as upset as I was over the friendly fire incident, at the same time, I'm sitting here and I'm watching this, this entity go in and say, no matter what, we're not going to leave this Marine behind. So and that's kind of I guess you could say, the dichotomy of war is, you see some of the bravest moments in your life and some of the most heroic, honorable moments in your life, and you see some of the most terrible moments in your life and things that you should never have to go through under any circumstances. So they pushed us for a little bit, and we went in this town pretty hard, and we got that Marine out of that town. We actually walked him out of that town, almost baiting people to shoot at us, just to kind of make a point of, listen, we understand the complexities of this and we understand the dangers of this, but if you think you're going to take a Marine, one of our Marines, and post him up on some TV site or somewhere, well, just understand what's going to be coming for you, because hell's going to come knocking. And so from there, we pushed further. We eventually pushed into Baghdad. We hit some sporadic hotspots throughout that particular movement, but for the most part, we pretty much rolled on through the Baghdad. Once we got into Baghdad, it was almost surreal. A lot of the people were coming out, and the locals were coming out and high-fiving us and acted very, very, very excited that we were there. And you look around and you see this, tanks and rifles and Marines in body armor, and you see kids kind of dancing. So it really gave you a sense of, well, maybe there is some good out of this after all. I mean, at the time, we didn't know where Saddam was. We didn't know if Iraq even wanted us there in the first place. All we knew was that, we had a warning order that this particular area had some pretty hostile equipment, and we had to go in there and we had to take care of it. So for us as a whole, I think that we thought that the war was over. And obviously President Bush made that speech of, hey, that's it, mission accomplished. And again, it's really easy to look back and criticize the statement and the complexities of that, but having actually been there, and there's a lot, you have to take so much into context. You can't just say, well, he shouldn't have said that, or, well, it was a bad call to make. A lot of it we didn't know. Every conflict we've been in, and I'm by no means a military historian, but it's pretty obvious that every conflict we've been in has been in a different environment with a different enemy, and we don't have any precedent as far as facing them prior to that. So I know that Desert Storm and Desert Shield had kind of been the tipping point as far as desert conflict went, But I mean, we had trained for this particular conflict, digging fighting holes and treating it like it was going to be the next Vietnam. And we get there, and it is literally nothing like Vietnam. As we know now, it was city to city and rooftop to rooftop, and it was fighting a guerrilla-like force that didn't have a uniform and didn't have an easily identifiable face. And we didn't know that at the time. So we get told, since we had been out there for so long, that, hey, you hit Baghdad, so 24th Mu, they're going to head back. And I remember our battalion commander, he had actually spoken with us and said, listen, the ships that brought us here, they're actually out in the Persian Gulf, and they want to take you all home. Now, if we fly back, we would get home a little bit faster, but I think we should go back. We came over with the Mu, we should go back with them. So everybody was kind of in agreement. I mean, I wanted to get home, just like everybody else, but it's like, yeah, maybe going on a ship and decompressing for a little bit probably isn't a bad idea. So we come home, and initially we're told that our next deployment is going to be back to the basics. Well, I don't want to say basics, but back to standard Marine Corps deployment, going out on a ship, kind of finding these areas to go and deal with these small scale problems. And one of the areas that we were constantly being told we were going to be a part of was a place called Liberia. So we're all kind of expecting to have a year, possibly longer. A typical Marine Corps enlistment in the infantry, you do 4 years. They usually get 2 deployments out of you. And the way we do it is, your first deployment, you're a junior Marine. You're a boot. You're still kind of learning the ropes and figuring things out. And then you come back from that first deployment, and all of your, quote, senior Marines, I say senior, but the guys that are on their way out, which, usually is the best ones. The military as a whole has a terrible retention problem. But they're on their way out, and then it's your turn to kind of step up and take over. So you get thrust into this leadership role at a very, very, very early age, and it's a very, very, very critical leadership role, which I'll touch on a little bit when I get to my fire department. But out of all the things I've gotten out of the military, I think that, even with all the neat fancy schools, SSBC and Advanced Squad Leader School, and I even got to go to we call it McQuist course, which is a swim course, really, really, really difficult swim course. But even with all those schools, I think just that expectation of having just gotten through combat with these young guys who now know that their next deployment could very well be their last, who have seen loss, seen death, and you got to get them not only to buy into the mission, but execute it to a Marine Corps standard. It's tough, and these guys, you're not going to bullshit. You're not going to sit there and yell and scream at them and treat them like children, because they're just as amped up as you are. So they're gonna see right through it. So again, me just having a horseshoe up my ass, I end up with, in my opinion, three of probably three of the best Marines, junior Marines, that I quite honestly think I've ever seen. These guys were just absolute rock stars. They came in ready to go, ready to work. One of them had already been on a deployment and hadn't seen combat, but then the other two were brand new. And I looked at these guys like they enlisted post 9/11. They enlisted, with all of this war being shown on TV, all of it. They were seeing us drag guys out of buildings on poncho liners. They were seeing the nature of this war. And of course, with the media being so critical about our reasonings for being there, and the country as a whole being sorely divided, my wife at one point, actually, while I was deployed, was run off the road by someone who, from my understanding, she had put something on the back of her window. My husband deployed or something, is some moto stuff, and I guess someone saw it and decided to run her off the road and yell at her. So it just it shows the times. Not everybody was on board with this, even with 9/11 being so recent. So these young guys, I look at them and I'm like, they enlisted with knowing all this. They still said, "Hey, I want this." So I think that mattered. I think as a whole that mattered. And I think the quality of Marine that it's during that time period. You're getting people who, there's no BS with them. They're there to do a job, and they already know all the dangers, and they don't care. They want to come in, they want to work hard, and they want to do their part. So so we had gotten informed that we were going to be doing this workup for a pending deployment, a pending MU, which a workup, it's a 6-month process. Anyone who's been in the Marines or the military knows it's just, you have all these different training packages, and they kind of start with, small unit stuff, and then you work up to these really large battalion exercises. And it felt like in the span of 2 weeks, we had gotten notice that the MU's off, the training package is off, that we were headed back to Iraq, but that it wasn't going to be a conflict. They told us it was going to be very unique, that this was coming down obviously from the president and from Congress, but they wanted a presence in Iraq. They wanted a Marine presence, which is unusual for the Marine Corps. The Army, they go and they set up bases and they do long-term, and that's kind of what they're outfitted for. Whereas the Marine Corps, we're not really outfitted for these long-term occupations. But we were told, hey, we're going to be setting up this long-term occupation in this part of Iraq known as Muhammadiyah. I think I believe there was a Ranger battalion that was already kind of situated there, and that we were going to go in and take over from them, and that all we were going to be doing was helping them create a military and a police force and infrastructure that we could assist with. And throughout the minimal training cycle, I think we had maybe 2 or 3 months before we were on a plane back over to Iraq. Very, very, very short time. But we had been told that there's this new thing, it's called SASO, Stability and Sustainment Operations, and that no more shooting, no more killing. The rifle is an afterthought. We're there to win the hearts and minds, which I'm sure you and anybody else who's listening.
If you like this show or any other show, please leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast listening platform
they wanted you to rebuild the.
You can look for us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Building. That's not what the military is
If you'd
for.
like to contact us,
there to
please
build
don't hesitate
cities,
to
you're
drop
there
us a
to
note
protect.
at sidealphaleadership@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Time is when we get this platoon commander who comes to us, who I have to give him a mention. He is a former enlisted Marine. We heard that he was in a scout sniper platoon during the Gulf War, which is kind of unusual. Although there is programs where enlisted Marines become officers, it's really unusual for that much time to have passed. And so we're thinking, like, man, we're getting a Desert Storm veteran who is going to be a new lieutenant, and he shows up, and anyone who knows Ilario Pontano, he's a very, very, very unique individual, and he's kind of, people have a hard time taking him. He's really good at speaking to people and getting people to buy into his vision. So he shows up, and his whole thing at first is that, this whole SASO thing, it's not true, that we're going to be stepping back into hell. And of course, at the time, we're like, look, we've been there, and you don't know what you're talking about. And we're going to kind of sit there and fight you on this. And I mean, he really went the extra mile. There's a term we use in the Marine Corps. It's not the most friendly term, but it's motarded, where we say that someone is motivated beyond the point of mental retardation. And to say that this guy kind of epitomized that would be an understatement. So we start doing stuff with him. Eventually we realize that, well, he's kind of unique, but ultimately it seems like he wants what's best for us. We start finding out a little bit about him, and it turns out that he was extremely wealthy. He had to get a special waiver to come back in. Guy was like a Goldman Sachs investment guy or something like that. I'm sure it's on his bio on Wikipedia, and had worked with like movies and like The Late Show and all that stuff. So just not your typical Marine, but to say that he saw what was coming and he had the foresight of what we were going to be stepping into. I think that we had a term for our team, Suicide Squad, on my second deployment, and obviously you don't get a name like Suicide Squad unless you're constantly putting yourself in dangerous positions. But he saw it. He saw what was coming. He knew that this whole stability operation, that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work, and that we were going to be once again in the heat of battle. So we end up we deployed to Iraq, and we end up in a town called Mahmudiya. And when we first get there, we're told that the biggest threat in this town is gas. That there's these illegal gas salesmen who sit on the corner of this really, really, really impoverished. I mean, if you've seen pictures of Ramadi or Fallujah, they all kind of look the same. These 4 or 5 story concrete buildings, just, a lot of white Toyota trucks, a lot of smog, a lot of pollution, just very, very, very impoverished. So we get told that's kind of what we're going to start doing, is we're going to go to these corners and we're going to stop these individuals from selling gas. And a lot of us are like, this is not what we're supposed to be here for. Like, well, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. So I think it took them a little bit, maybe, I don't know, a month or so to kind of get a foothold in the town and get the town of Mahmudiya and some of the elders to open up to the leadership and find out what they want. So after, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of just doing Overwatch while these grunts would go in and they would kind of roll up in their trucks, just like we do over here, and grab these guys for selling gas. And I mean, we didn't have anywhere to put them. So we just kind of let them go and told them, look, don't do it again. But it's really hard to enforce something like that in a town where, quite honestly, it's lawless. It's lawlessness. So we finally get told, okay, we got a mission. We're going to build up a police force. So our battalion, they like, okay, well, this is an unusual mission, but we're going to do the best that we can with this. So we go through this recruitment process. Now, mind you, I can't really speak on the specifics of a lot of this just because I wasn't a part of it. The only time I came in really was marksmanship and some other small unit infantry tactics and observation and stuff like that. But we tried to mirror some of the stuff that we did over here, and we certainly had, I don't want to say unlimited funding, but it was very evident that our hires, so to speak, the overall overseas leadership, the military leadership for that AO, this was what they wanted. This is what everybody was doing. They wanted a police force. They wanted a military. They wanted it to mirror our military, and this is how we were going to rebuild democracy. So we went through this process. We get these future police cadets. They start training them up, and as soon as we cut them loose, I'd say in probably a day or two, we get a QRF call, QRF, Quick Reaction Force, to the police station. We go there, and all the policemen are there, strung up, cut to pieces. It was very much a statement. They were making a statement, and that was, if you think you're going to come in here and you're going to take these local citizens and you're going to make them police officers, this is what we're going to do to them. And to say it was brutal would be an understatement. I mean, it was women, kids. It was awful. So you see that one time and you're like, I really don't know if this is something that we should be doing. And all of a sudden it's like, well, we're going to try again. And again, going back to having good leadership, good company commander, good platoon commander, Ilario, he kind of saw the bigger picture, and he's like, look, this is not effective, but we got to do it. So we got to kind of circumvent some of these things and figure out a way to effectively produce some type of product to where we can maybe not have a full-out police force, but at least some type of occupying force, so to speak, local occupying force that can help enforce some sort of law. So they ended up trying a much smaller group of people that were vetted, that were maybe already translators, already a part of the base, the base staff, and same thing. And it kind of became this cycle for I'd say almost 2 months, where we kept training these locals up, and we would go and we would clean up their bodies and fight off whatever small pockets of resistance we could find. And then on top of this, there's this ever looming threat of IEDs. And at the time, IEDs weren't really the as large as they ended up becoming. It was mostly they would take Coke cans and put explosives in them and hang them off bridges. So when we went under the overpasses, the Coke cans would explode and they would blind the gunner. Very few times was it anything more than a trip to Rammstein for anyone that got hit, but it was kind of a foreshadowing of what was to come. So I think overall, and again, applying this, now and as far as, because obviously it's a leadership podcast, it was one of the most difficult times for me emotionally, physically. It's just for all of us, because we're being asked to conduct this mission, and the rest, we knew that America saw what was going on, but like anything, war kind of becomes this afterthought, and that's okay. That's sometimes that's what's necessary. You can't expect everybody back home to be invested in what you're doing 24/7, because when it's something like war, it would drive people crazy. But at the same time, you start thinking, I mean, what are we really doing here? Like, we're not fighting terrorists. We're competing against local guerrillas who, I mean, are they looking at us like an occupying force, or are they looking at us like they want to kill Americans? We don't know. And we're hearing different things. And it was really disheartening. It was really, really, really disheartening. It was day after day after day. And when you're going up against a guerrilla force and you have the superior technology and the superior training, the things that they have to do in order to put their message out, it's usually written in brutal, very, 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 very brutal tactics. And and again, it's also that part of the world too, right? It's just it was hard. It was hard, to say the least. So right around this time, we start getting rumblings that there is a local cell in Mahmudiya, and they're starting to close in on who they are. They're starting to close in on where they're located and what they're doing. So we eventually get this raid package, and we know it's kind of a big deal just because it's only 2 squads on it. We got Overwatch. There's a couple of counter intel guys, a couple of SOF guys, very, very, very small scale, but they're building mock-ups of the house and little things that you can kind of tell, like, okay, this is going to be something legit. Like, this is going to be something serious. So we go out, and for all intents and purposes, it was a standard raid. We roll up, and we call them squirters, but they run out the house, and we have a cordon set up, which is a security perimeter. We put that in place beforehand. So they get snatched up, and obviously they're being interrogated while some of the Marines are downstairs going through the house, and we're watching them up on an adjacent rooftop, and they're pulling out makeshift mortar tubes and RPG launchers and all kinds of paraphernalia. And it's like, okay, these guys are definitely up to no good. So the 2 individuals, they're flex cuffed. They're leaned up against the car. My platoon commander, Ilario, he's on the ground. He's kind of running the whole show. He's out in between. It almost looked like a cul-de-sac, but with dirt roads instead of, I guess, regular roads. So three or four structures, if I remember correctly. He's kind of in the middle, and the 2 individuals that are on the car, I can hear him yelling at them. I can't hear what he's yelling, but there's movement. So we get them on glass. We look at them. We get them up on the scope. We're watching what they're doing. And as we do that, they both take off towards him. So now, mind you, this isn't, the United States. Things were a little bit different overseas in this environment. So he does what we've been trained to do. He raises his rifle and he puts them both down. He kills them. So just to kind of set the stage, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the time frame, Mahmadiyya, just prior to Fallujah, actually, if I'm not mistaken, a week prior to this is when that contractor, Nick Berg, was beheaded on national TV. So it was very much a game of, hey, we're sending a message. When we were in Iraq for this particular deployment, we were actually attached to 1st Marine Division. And at the time, General Jim Mattis had a saying, no better friend, no worse enemy. And that was to describe the Marines and locals. We can be your best friend or we can be your worst enemy. So Ilario, thinking kind of outside the box, because that's pretty much what this deployment consisted of, is outside the box thinking, and it was encouraged, calls one of the interpreters over and says, I want you to write out a sign on these bodies that says no better friend, no worst enemy, and put it on the bodies so they know, so the locals know that, hey, this is what happens when you come at these Marines. This is what happens when you try to kill these Marines. And that was kind of the end of it. So we go back, and it's considered a successful raid. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of intelligence to be gathered because the two individuals weren't alive anymore, but they certainly got a lot of stuff out of the house with the site exploitation. So that was it. And then from there, it seemed like it was almost maybe 24 hours. We get notice that things are starting to take off in a city called Fallujah. And we are going to go and we're going to stage on the southern corner of this city and just kind of see what happens. So I think all of us kind of welcome the change of pace. We're like, okay, we want to get out of this town. We want to go, be a part of something a little bit bigger, because it's depressing around. And depressing is an understatement. It's just you're constantly around that death and destruction, and even in a wartime environment, I can't overemphasize how awful it was seeing that stuff almost daily and really trying to make something positive out of it, give them something to where the things like what we saw in Africa on my first deployment didn't become day-to-day living, right? You didn't have this defenseless group of people that were just constantly being stepped on by these evil individuals. So we head up to Fallujah. And obviously, Fallujah, it ends up becoming a lot more than what we thought it was. There was a warning order, and Jim Mattis, General Mattis, being who he is, we hear that, okay, he's going to take this convoy with him and a couple other Marines, and he's going to start at the southern edge of the city and drive through the northern edge of the city. And if he gets shot at one time, then he's going to direct the 1st Marine Division essentially to retake this city house by house, door by door. So an interesting thing is we, as a whole, obviously he does it. He tries to drive through, and he gets shot at, and it becomes very apparent that Fallujah there's a lot more going on in Fallujah. There was an individual, Muqtada al-Sadr, who I guess had some relationship with the U.S. prior to the invasion, and they'd worked out some things, and somehow, and I'm sure there's, a lot of specifics about this out there, and I don't want to get too much into that, but we had noticed that the people that we were fighting, the people that we were coming up against in Fallujah, this was not what we were used to. These guys were determined. They had fixed fighting positions. They had avenues of approach covered by heavy machine guns. They had booby traps in almost every single house you came across. They knew what they were doing. It was almost, you call it a professional warfighter. And they were effective. And really quickly, we reorientated to this type of enemy. And it was like, okay, well, we're going to go literally house to house and we're going to reclaim this city. So we we're getting brief after brief after brief. And actually, one of the scariest missions I ever went on in my life, we talk about always wanting that, that cool guy mission where you're kind of out by yourself and doing your job. And I won't say I was out by myself, but obviously the idea is just prior to the Marines getting into Fallujah, they wanted eyes on some of these strategic spots. So we had gotten a brief of, hey, there's a whole bunch of SF units and SOF units operating in the area, but we're gonna put some of you guys out here in an overwatch position, and you're going to insert a day or two before the main effort begins. And we start getting the rundown of this, and it's like we're literally going to be creeping through this city with an active enemy that is trying to make an example out of us. And right around the time there was a force reconnaissance, which is like the Marine Corps. It's like what we consider our special operations, a force reconnaissance sniper team that was out on an OP and had gotten killed. They didn't come up on their radio checks, and they sent Marines out there, and they found a bunch of blood and some torn up camis, and that was it. So it was very much like, we're finally going to get to do the mission that we were trained to do. But at the same time, it's like, man, it was frightening. It was so frightening that it was hard to contain the shaking walking through these towns. And they had plans and procedures in place. And, you had to come up on the radio every 15 minutes and without delving too much into tactics, we had units around us should something happen. But at the same time, it's like, this is it, boys. This is what you asked for, and we're going to get to go out and we're going to get to do it. So we go from that to being called back to this southern fob and being told that everything's off. The retaking of Fallujah is off. The operations to take the geographical sectors, all of it's off. And at this point, we had lost, because we would patrol into this city, we had lost, probably sent home 8 or 9 Marines. Some of them in body bags, some of them missing limbs. And it was just like, what the hell are you talking about? It's off. Like, no, we need to go in there and we need to do this. And what we found out at the time was this was right around the election. So the politics back home had decided that it wasn't a good idea to have Marines going house to house in this city while you've got candidates that are running for office for the president. So we're just going to sit. And if Bush gets reelected, then I'm sure the operation will be back on. But if I think it was Kerry at the time, if John Kerry gets elected president, well, then we don't know what's going to happen. And it's so for almost a month, we sat getting mortared and shot at every night, taking sniper fire, and just literally with our hands tied, nothing we could do. So again, it's going back to that, your feelings, and even though you could say, well, you're in a combat zone, it's to be expected. Yes, it's to be expected, but also your mindset going from believing in this so much that, hey, I'm ready to go, I'm willing to die for this, like, let's go, to what the hell are they doing? Like, we're watching our brothers get carried out in Blackhawks, and we're, over an election. Like, it's either let's take this town or let's not take it, but we've already spilled blood here. Let's go and let's finish this up. And again, it's just the challenges it brings, not only for myself, but for the Marines that I'm in charge of, who are maybe 1 or 2 years off from me. The only thing separating us is maybe a year or two of experience, and I have to convince these who are having the same thoughts and the same questions that I am of, hey, keep your head in the game, keep focused, because I don't want to lose you too. So that became known as the First Battle of Fallujah. That's a lot of people ask there when they talk to me. They're like, why is it called the Second Battle of Fallujah? It's like, well, there really was technically 2 battles. So Bush gets elected. We end up heading into Fallujah, and out of all of my deployments, 4 in total, this time in Fallujah, this was just absolute. This was combat. This is what everyone said it was. We literally went from house to house to house, and it was almost disheartening because you're up on that position, you're up on Overwatch, and you're watching Marines go into doors and get dragged out on these poncho liners, and it has to be done. We see a house and we know that it's an objective, and the Marines, they have to get into that house, and it's not a matter of if or when. It's just a matter of, well, if you're on point and you open that door and it's booby trapped or there's someone on the other side. I mean, mount tactics in general, there's a reason why a lot of our special operations have pretty much unilaterally focused on that, because from the jump, you're set up for failure. I could take anybody and say, listen, if I put you in your house and I'm going to come in your house and I'm going to give you a weapon, and your job is to stop me and my job is to stop you, and I'm coming to that front door, who do you think's going to win? It was tough, to say the least. It was we took more casualties during that time period than any other time during that deployment. And that deployment, that time frame, 2004, if I'm not mistaken, that ranks as the bloodiest. I think April and October. It's the bloodiest months as far as American casualties during what we call the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, and that's including Afghanistan. So we get through Fallujah. Once we get through Fallujah, we end up back south in a town called Latakia, which is just south of Mahmudiya, and we start hearing these rumblings that our platoon commander is going to be yanked from the platoon. And the rumor mill, when you're in the Marine Corps, especially when you're on deployment, it's crazy. It's you got to be really careful about what you believe, and it's no different than the firehouse. It's just with the firehouse, you have access to these sources where you can vet this stuff. With us, we don't have access to these battalion commanders and these battalion XOs. We can't just walk up and ask them, but we're being told that one of the sergeants who was an armorer with us, who wasn't even a grunt, he wasn't exactly an outstanding Marine, that he had told when we were in Fallujah, he was back at the base, the camp, I should say Camp Fallujah, that he had told or had said something in the chow hole line to the effect of Ilario had murdered these two Iraqis in cold blood, and there was some higher up standing around, and they were like, say that again. And I guess he, in my mind, at that moment, he could have stopped and said, hey, I'm just, I'm upset. I'm mad. Like I shouldn't have said that. But he decided to double down and say, oh yeah, I was on this op, and I saw it, and he murdered these guys in cold blood. And the time there hadn't been anyone charged with crimes of this nature. What had happened though was Abu Ghraib, and I should have mentioned that earlier, that that changed a lot when we were overseas. When Abu Ghraib happened, that's when things got really, 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 really dicey. And that just kind of goes to show you, the power not only of the media, but and that was such an awful thing, but it's things like that literally changed the course of battle for everybody else. And I often wonder, how many more people died because of that instance. And it's again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just because we'll have to make this another 6-part episode. But so we were actually out at a fob. It was one of Uday Hussein's, Saddam's son. It was one of his, I guess, pleasure palaces, and we're just kind of monitoring this AO and patrolling this AO, and I think they're kind of just biding time until our deployment cycle's up to send us home. And I'm sure they looked at it like they had just gotten through Fallujah. Let's try to give these guys a break while still being mission effective. And all of a sudden, we get noticed that there's a couple of us I'd say maybe 2 squads in total that are to, and we knew it was serious when they say, you're not taking your rifle. When they take your rifle in a combat zone, it's like, okay, something very bad's coming, because that is an extension of you, and to remove it from you, it's to say it's scary would be an understatement. And for a lot of us, we didn't know what the hell this was about. There were a couple of guys that were like, "Oh, this is probably that Sergeant Coburn BS," and it's like, no, there's no way that got any legs. There were so many people out there with us, it wouldn't make any sense. So we get taken back to one of the bases, one of the FOBs off of I believe it was Route Michigan, one of the Army bases, and they won't tell us what it's about. They won't tell us anything other than get back, shower up, get some food, and just kind of stand by. And so we go back, and we've got people that are literally like on us 24/7. Again, another red flag, right? Like, okay, what the hell is this? And so we finally get called into these rooms, and it's almost like how it was on TV. We've got these NCIS agents telling us that they know about the murder, and they know that we were complicit in it, and that if we don't tell them exactly what they want to hear, right? And they didn't say, tell us what happened. Multiple times it was, tell us what we know, tell us what we want to hear, that Hilario had murdered these 2 Iraqis. So, a lot of us we were shocked. I think we're like, okay, this has got to be a bad dream. And none of us could talk to Hilario. They had separated him from everybody else. So this goes on for a couple of days, and every single day, it's like more of the same BS. And if you've ever watched, like, some of these other people who have gone through this stuff and been vocal about it, and the military justice system is not like our justice system in America. It's a completely separate thing. And the things that they can do and the things that they can get away with, it's absolutely egregious, even for the military. So it's just nonstop. They're calling us in. They're telling us, okay, so-and-so told us that you were the one that told everybody to shut up and don't, just making it more and more sinister, almost like we're a bunch of comic book villains that are trying to keep this great big secret. And the whole time it's like, look, there were members of the counter intel community out there with us. There were officers out there with us. There was a lieutenant colonel out there with us. There were SEALs out there with us. There was all these other people out there with us that witnessed this event take place, and nobody said nothing. But for whatever reason, you're coming after us. And for me, this was just, I in my head, I was done. I was done. I was like, you know what? I just want to get back home. I don't want to be here anymore. I just can't believe, after everything that I had watched my Marines do to advance this mission, to even when they didn't believe in it, even when they didn't buy into it, even when I know that they were thinking, like, I don't know if I'm ready to die for this, and they still got up and they still got on those trucks and they still went out there and they still did their job. And you watch this, this individual in their very clean uniform and sit here and berate you and tell you that you're a bunch of cowboys and you're out of control and this and that. It's like, you can only hear that for so long. And I'll be honest, looking back on it, I can remember, like, making the decision in my head that I'm going to deck this dude. Like, I am. I can't sit here and take this. I can't sit here and allow this individual to and knowing what he's doing to my and they're being champs about it. And I go and I try to talk about him, and they're like, "Oh, we're fine. Don't worry about it." But we can only have limited conversation with each other because they literally think we're war criminals. So finally, we get word that Ilario is being formally charged with 2 counts of murder and a whole bunch of other UCMJ nonsense kind of catch-all that they're throwing at him. But that in the meantime, we're not going to be a part of that, and we're going to go back to our platoons and just kind of go about business like nothing happened. And the day that we get released back to our company, we get back to the fob, and on our way back, we get essentially caught in this ambush, and probably one of, if not the most incredibly heroic. I watched these Marines who were in this literal kill box push their way through this ambush and work the Marines out of the kill zone. We had 2 Marines that had gone down, and one of them was shot in the eye, one of them was shot in the arm. And the corpsman that was with us, who was a part of this trial, who they were berating him and calling him all these names, he had actually jumped up in the front of a 7-ton because he knew that we were in this weird spot where we were too far away from the base. The QRF wasn't coming for another couple minutes, but he had to do something. So he jumps up in this Mack truck and he takes off towards the base. I mean, if they would have known he was going to do that, they could have quite possibly intervened and stopped, and God knows what they could have done to him. But he made that decision. He made it in an instant, and that's why Mark, one of the guys, is still alive today, because he did that. And Mark's talked about that many times. And so we pushed through this ambush, and it's horrific. And I see all these things happen, and I don't know, it's really hard to process, because it's like we just went from being called scum and war criminals. And I watch these Marines, these 20-year-old kids, the heat gets turned on, and they literally go from just being down on themselves and berated to the absolute tip of the spear that I know them to be. And it stays with you. And at the time, I didn't think a lot of it. I just thought, well, you know what? Okay, screw them. They don't know who we are. It's fine. It is what it is. None of the guys that were a part of this, they never got recognized for it. We tried to put quite a few Marines from that ambush in for awards. John Dunham, not the Medal of Honor John Dunham, but another one. Richard Davis, Michael Chiquez, 3 Marines who did some really, really, really heroic stuff, and they never got they didn't do it for attention. Others did it for attention, but damn it, they deserved it, and they never got it. So fast forward, we get home, and we're kind of briefed beforehand that, hey, this has kind of become a circus. It's on the cover of Time magazine. The thing is they didn't realize that Ilario wasn't a normal Marine. Ilario was someone who had ties to the celebrity community, who had, just access to things that a lot of normal people wouldn't have access to. And when the Marine Corps goes after someone, they go after you with the intent of crushing you. So Ilario fought back, and
Hey, Dave, before you go into that story, we're at the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to stop you right there, because I know this is where the story starts to actually get pretty interesting. And we're going to do a part 3, because all the stuff that you're telling now kind of gets to the heart of everything that you went through, and your decision when you finally left the Marines, and where you went, into the fire service. But I'm going to stop you right there, because I know the story with Ilario is kind of interesting. Like you said, he has money, and he's not your typical Marine, and how he is going to fight back. So we're going to stop there, and we're going to come back for part 3, and we'll wrap everything up. Is that cool with you?
I am so sorry. That's fine. I'm trying so hard.
No, I think it lays the groundwork for who you are, what you went through, because a lot of people got deployed. Some saw combat, some saw a lot of combat, some didn't. But how the things that you saw kind of shaped you as you moved forward. And I think that, the story with Ilario has a lot to it, because that's how I came to know you in the beginning, and we'll talk about that on part 3. But I'm going to stop you here, because we're starting to get into the the sunset of your military career. But it's an interesting story. But the one thing I can say is I want to go back. When your Marines were being, all kinds of insults being hurled at them, and they're being accused of being war criminals and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, when the chips were down, the Marines, your Marines, did their job, just like a fireman. When the chips are down, they're going to do their job. And the title of this entire podcast is "Once a Marine, Always a Marine, and a Firefighter Too." And that kind of brings it all together. Is no matter what they said about your Marines while they were interrogating them, when the firefighting started, they turned into Marines and they did their job. And it's important to point that out. So that old saying is once a Marine, always a Marine. Absolutely. So I'm going to stop you there, and we were going to bring it back on part 3. And all of this will air in the month of April, so it's going to be a pretty good sized chunk of information throughout the month of April. So if you're game, I will get you back on here for part 3.
Absolutely. Yep. I promise I'll bring it all home. And I'm really trying, but it's because, again, it's like that was that is one thing that I still to this day, I still am, because I've seen other people get it. I've seen other people who actually who Ilario knows, there's a really infamous story, Task Force Violent, the 1st Marine Corps Special Operations Battalion. When they deployed, they got an ambush, they fought back out of the ambush, and the story became, these Marines, they just started shooting civilians indiscriminately. So these Marines were like, they were the best the Marine Corps had to offer, all like former Force Recon guys. Actually, I had two guys who were with me who stayed in and deployed with them and were there for this. And so like these guys, they get there's 8 of them. They end up getting like locked up. And 2 of them, I think, were held for almost a year. And it was just, it's so eventually, almost like in a movie, they find out that there is video footage, a good sized chunk of this ambush on video on some like random Al Jazeera website, and it exonerates the Marines.
Sure.
Like unequivocally exonerates.
But they had to pay the price, for that year.
So to this day, there's a major Fred Galvin. If you go to this day, he is trying to get the Marine Corps to apologize to those Marines, and they won't. To this day, he actually met with Ilario, and they talked for a little, and I wasn't privy to the conversation, but and that's a guy, this guy, like I don't know. I think that was something that I just, out of all the things that I could, I can deal with the mission kind of being, I don't want to say bullshit, but it is what it is, right? It's combat. People don't know what's happening, and I don't want to simplify it and say, they had us doing something we shouldn't have been doing. We were doing what we thought we were supposed to do, and it adapted and it changed. But that one really stung. And it's literally like, once they found out Ilario had the money, they said Coburn wasn't a credible witness. They told Ilario he could have his commission back, and all was forgiven, except any of the awards we submitted, anything that we talked about from that time frame. They actually put us on a gag order. Him writing his book technically violated that gag order.
Well, we'll get into all of that on part 3, and we'll knock it out from there. So we'll be back in touch, and we'll finish up part 3.
All right,
man.
Good. Again, I'm
Nope,
sorry.
it's good stuff. Don't apologize because this is the stuff that we need to hear. So until then, I will talk to you for part 3.
All right, sounds good. I'll talk to you then.
See you then.
All right.
Bye.